Hi, I'm Daniel James Howe, co-producer of Community Express, your monthly community affairs program for Santa Cruz County. This month, we're bringing you a special episode comprised of the conversations we've had over the last few months with various stakeholders in the Pogonip Trail proposal. Pogonip is the largest park in the Santa Cruz City Greenbelt, encompassing some 600 plus acres. There's a rich history to the park. Lime kilns that date to the mid-19th century, a lodge that was enjoyed by the golf and polo playing residents in town until World War II, and spring boxes that are now a koi pond at the end of one trail. Currently, the City Parks Department is working on a new multi-use trail proposal that would enhance access to and from UCSC and create a corridor to downtown. Additionally, there are rising concerns over crime in the park, which the Parks Department hopes can be alleviated through the increased traffic that the new trail would provide. Others feel that the importance of maintaining the park in the most natural state possible trumps the potential crime-fighting aspects of the new trail proposal. We sat down with some of those most involved in this discussion. Former Mayor Celia Scott, who has been involved with the park for decades, President of the Mountain Bikers of Santa Cruz, Mark Davidson, representatives from the Santa Cruz Police Department, Sergeant Dan Flippo and Deputy Chief Rick Martinez, as well as the Santa Cruz Parks Department Director, Danette Shoemaker. While there have been extensive conversations about the trail proposal already, the time for speaking out is not over. A final decision has not yet been made, so the City and Parks Department are still soliciting public input. Go to a City Council meeting or call the Parks Department if you want to have your voice heard. Thanks for watching Community Television, and I hope you enjoy our Pogonip special.
Tell us about this new plan. The plan is to build a trail, 1.5-mile trail through the Pogonip in order to make more pedestrians and bikers go through the park so that heroin addicts will move out of the park. Is that the big picture?
Well, I guess you might say that's the big picture. The primary purpose of this trail, as I understand it, and has been stated by the Director of Parks and Recreation, is public safety. And it's important to understand that we're talking about the very edge of Pogonip. We're not talking about the whole property. And the ranger, John Wallace, made that point at the community meeting a few weeks ago, pointing out that that's the only part of the park that is really an issue. And I use the word park. I would like to just clarify that Pogonip is the largest, and some people consider it the crown jewel of the Santa Cruz Greenbelt lands. It's not just an ordinary park. It was preserved for its natural habitat, for its beauty, and it's just a remarkable range of views and open space. So it's sort of not like a little park.
Yeah.
It's something really special in our community.
Yeah. So getting the debate is all about the trail. People are saying, yes, we want a trail in order to get more people into the park, it sounds like, and in order to make a connection between downtown and getting towards the campus. Is that maybe lay out what you see?
Well, I think myself, there's a little bit of confusion about these purposes. The primary purpose, as I said, I believe, is to deal with a public safety issue that has arisen with drug dealing on Pogonip, which is something that has really increased tremendously just in the last few years. Associated with it, but not, as I understand it, the primary purpose, is the purpose of connecting what's called the University Connector Trail, which comes down from the campus and connects down to Highway 9 more directly with downtown. This, of course, means a lot of trail that's off the Pogonip, because once you get to the bottom of this proposed trail, you're actually on Golf Club Drive. You have to go down to Highway 9, you have to cross Highway 9, you have to ride along the river levee. It's not like the whole project is really on Pogonip. So
some of the money that they're talking about spending is to make a trail in town itself, not just...
Well, the trail is there, but are things off the Pogonip site that are going to have to be dealt with. It's proposed actually as a multi-use trail, horses, bikers, pedestrians. There's no clear place for horse bands to stage, so it's not at all clear how that's going to happen. And one of the concerns that some of us have is that the project, before it was sent from the Planning Commission to the Parks Commission to the City Council, really wasn't a fully developed project. So that's now happening. in the process of doing the environmental analysis of the impacts of this proposed trail.
Okay.
It's important to understand that there are a lot of people who use Pogonip. It isn't really getting more people in everywhere. It's just this particular route, which has, because of its relationship to the rail line, actually has enabled, it's been a spot where drug dealers have been able to go into the Pogonip, but off the rail line and off Highway 9.
So help us think through this argument about bringing more people along this rail line would make the heroin dealers move. Because, you know, one thought that comes to mind is, can't they just go deeper into the park or behind a tree or something? I mean, if they like to be in that area because it works for their business, why would they move to a completely different part of town and not deeper into the park?
Well, I think that's a very good question, and that's one of the major issues. What evidence is there that this is going to actually have the effect of increasing public safety? And it's reasonable to consider several things. First of all, drug dealing takes place all over the city of Santa Cruz, on Pacific Avenue. It takes place along the river levee, and this trail will connect the river levee directly with Pogonip in a way in which it is not now. But what we've discovered is that the access takes place off the rail line. People come off the rail line. They've created little side trails that go into the Pogonip off the rail line. And to us, it makes a lot more sense to look at, and that's what we're trying to do right now, very seriously consider an alternative to this for a bicycle route right along the rail line itself. It's already used by bicyclists. All you have to do is go out there and you can see it. And it also has a connection that's already there, a trail connection, up to what's called the Rincon Trail, which then goes up to the university.
Okay, so let me summarize.
Yeah, it's hard to do this without a map. But
yeah. So the proposal is 1.5 miles,
yes,
some of which is in the Pogonip. And
all of that is in the Pogonip.
And it's a new dirt path.
That's right.
And your argument is, let's not do that new one. Let's already use land next to the railway and paths that have already been set up to go where you want to go.
Well, I think the argument is it's complex. The rail line, of course, is not owned by the city of Santa Cruz. It's owned by the Big Trees Railway Company. There was a study that was done by the county of Santa Cruz in 2006, a very detailed study of the feasibility of putting a really constructed bicycle path right along the rail line all the way to Felton. And that study is still in existence. We've got a copy of it, but it was not actually done. So what we would like to see is just to back up a little bit here and look at the possible alternatives. Because there are a lot of trails on Pogonip. It's not like there aren't trails on Pogonip, but there's only one that's a multi-use trail that includes horses and pedestrians and bicyclists. And that's the trail coming up from Highway 9, part of which is actually an old road, and then this thing called the Yukon Trail, which goes up to the university. And without getting into the issue of hikers versus cyclists, to me the real question is this really going to make a difference in the public safety issues on the Pogonip? Because that to me is really the primary problem. Nobody wants to have a portion of our greenbelt land subject to drug dealing, subject to the potential for fires, a whole series of things which we just don't want to have happen in our community. So how do we deal with this?
And what's your thinking? What's the best way to deal with it?
Well, my thinking is that we look at the alternatives instead of just zeroing in on this one idea. And I think that's what the environmental review process should now do.
What are some alternatives that are interesting to you?
Well, as I said, the main one is to have bicycles along the rail line, which is where the drug dealers get access, off the rail line itself. So if that's going to be of help to have more activity there, that seems like the logical place to look first to see whether that's a possibility.
Okay, a bike trail along the railway.
Right.
We only have a few minutes left. Where are we at in the political process? What's going to happen from here?
Well, the City Council accepted a recommendation of the Parks Commission to go forward with the environmental review process. There's a certain amount of money that's been set aside for that. An environmental consultant, Stephanie Strelo, has been hired. She is now going to be looking at this and putting together an environmental document.
Paid for by Measure H funds.
Well, I don't know that it's really Measure H funds.
Okay, I had read that.
I've heard that too, but there's a little bit of confusion there, I think.
Okay.
In any case, it's funds that are available, what they're called discretionary funds in the Parks Department.
Okay.
So those funds are there. That's going to be paid for.
They're going to study it.
They're going to study it,
months.
and that's right. And the question is, are they going to do a really thorough study which looks at these alternatives, looks at what kind of evidence is there that just putting more people on a trail on this part of Pogonip is really going to have an effect in reducing the public safety dangers that we have out there now.
First, tell us about your organization and what you're working to accomplish.
Okay. Mountain Bikers of Santa Cruz is a volunteer, nonprofit educational organization that has about 400 members. We are advocating for the promotion of mountain biking in Santa Cruz County, including promotion of events and advocating for more legitimate access to mountain bikers on the area parks.
Okay, and tell us about the plans for the viewers. What's going into the Pogonip, and what is its purpose?
So there was a 1.5-mile multi-use trail that was proposed by the city departments of Parks and Recreation, the police and fire department, primarily as a way of mitigating the current environmental degradation and because of the unauthorized camping and drug activity, selling and using that's currently occurring up in that park. About 150 acres of the eastern part of the Pogonip was closed in about August 2009 as a interim solution to this problem. However, it's turned into an ongoing problem, and it's really chewing up a lot of city resources in terms of law enforcement and fire. And so someone in the, I guess the police and parks department, they were discussing, and one of the things that they've noticed nationally is in these kind of areas that get taken over by blight, moving in legitimate use has a consequence of displacing the illegitimate use. And so they proposed this multi-use trail. And
so yeah, talk about the legitimate use of what this trail would be.
Right. So the proposal is to build a brand new 1.5-mile multi-use single-track trail. This is all a dirt trail. Should be about 3 to 4 feet wide.
Is this going through the middle of Pogonip, or?
It's more along the eastern border, paralleling the train tracks, but it'll be completely enclosed within the Pogonip bounds. And it will essentially go from, as a connector from Golf Club Road, just inside the Pogonip, all the way to the Yukon Trail, which is currently the only legitimate access for mountain bikes to get up to the university and to Wilder Ranch.
Now, we're also seeing some illegitimate use by mountain bikers in the area as well, right?
Yes. Yeah, but that's been like a historical. The fact of the matter is that mountain biking is definitely a very popular recreational activity and has been increasing in popularity in the past 20 years. There's a lot of Santa Cruz residents and visitors who are very passionate about the activity and engage in it. There's a lot of the local bike industry. So we've pretty much grown up around trails. The pace at which we can get authorized mountain biking trails hasn't kept up with the demand over the years. So we're getting a spillover of there's just too much of a demand for those type of trails, which is a lot faster than land managers can facilitate and allow legal mountain bike access.
Okay, so what would this proposed trail mean for the average Santa Cruz resident and for bikers, hikers,
right,
people who go into the Pogonip?
So for one thing, it provides a 1.5-mile recreational corridor and transportation corridor.
Because this connects downtown to...
Right. It connects essentially the Levee area and just past the Tannery Arts Center up to the campus. From a transportation point of view, it allows people to ride their bicycles while bypassing the west side, the traffic on King Street and Mission Street to get up to campus. Very safe way of getting through For recreationalists, it basically opens up the downtown area to all the great trails and open space up at the campus and Henry Cowell and Wilder Ranch. So it basically connects the levees, and you can see there could be some increased economic benefits. For example, increase in tourism revenue by allowing out-of-town guests to park downtown, start their rides at a coffee shop, end at a beer and burgers. But also it'll reduce the costs to city services so that there's not they don't have to respond so much to the issues that happen there all the time.
Well, I think it wouldn't necessarily get me on the trail with my road bike,
right.
But it's good to hear that multiple people would be able to use it. So hikers and bikers.
Hikers, bikers, leashed dog walkers, and equestrians.
Okay.
So this trail will be open to all users.
Okay. So let's talk about the different spaces that it's going to affect. It's going to connect to the Yukon Trail at the top of the Pogonip.
Yes, correct. Yes.
And then it's also going to affect what the city has termed Heroin Hill.
Correct.
Yeah.
So the proposal is that this trail is going to be like an alignment of existing social trails that have been built up over the years through to the transients and the drug traffic. So there's a whole network of trails through that area. The project managers hope to reclaim some of those trails, and we can legitimize them, widen them, and repurpose those trails while decommissioning other spider-type trails out through there. The objective is that we are going straight through the area known as Heroin Hill to take that sanctuary away from them as a good area for in deep cover for their illegitimate activities. By just moving in there with the trail where families and mountain bikers and equestrians can recreate, the added activity is probably going to displace all those people who are currently there.
And what are some of the consequences of having all that drug use in that area specifically?
Well, the current consequences right now, it's a place that's remote enough from the town that it's inconvenient for fire and police safety services to get to. They'd have to go to Highway 9 and then hike up. And of course, up on the hill there, these transients and drug traffickers, they have the sort of strategic advantage of the higher ground, so they can see when people are coming. We've told by the police department that they can scatter people out there, but they're back within a few hours. So it's almost like they need constant monitoring. By taking that sanctuary out off the table of this criminal element, then it'll displace them to somewhere else in the city, and hopefully it'll be much easier for law enforcement to address these.
Now, we've seen encampments and homeless folks, also drug users along other trails, even within the city limits, such as down on Barson Street and the Flats, and other places. What's to say they're not going to move just off the trails or a little bit deeper into the woods? Yeah,
well, that's always a concern about pushing them deeper into the woods. What we have noticed over the past 10 years with a lot of the trails in the area, including the existing the Yukon Trail, there was homeless camping and also drug activity at the place of the existing Yukon Trail. When about 9-10 years ago, when that trail was built, even the survey work had an effect of displacing that activity away from that area. So one thing we notice from recreationalists, from mountain bikers, we've noticed that where we have seen camps, they're very temporary. They go away almost immediately as soon as the bikers come up. I think these people, they just want their privacy. They don't want to come across mountain bikers or recreationalists or anything like that, because we can turn them in. We have phones, we can call the police. And that's what we intend to do in the future once this trail is built, is to maintain a relationship with the city and public services that we will monitor the situation and ensure that it won't come back.
So this will be safe for recreationalists?
Yeah, I think that the key point is that the multi-use and the mountain biking community really want to take an active role in the stewardship of this property. We have already committed to help construct the trail with volunteer labor. We're working with partners like the Santa Cruz County Horsemen's Association. They have a trail machine to help construct it. We're also, us and the local bike industry is committed to fundraising so that there are some hard costs for some bridges, and we're willing to raise the money to pay for those bridges. Once we do this, of course, we're going to have, we're going to be invested in this trail. So we will not want to see it go back to blight. Like once we're in there as a recreational resource, we certainly do not want to yield it back to the criminal activity that currently takes it over right now.
Mm-hmm. And that criminal activity is having a deleterious effect on the city itself, right? I mean, it's threatened the city water supply.
Yeah, so this is a very interesting thing I noticed when rereading the Pogonip EIR, the whole process back in like 96 to 98. Was I noticed there was a letter of concern from Bill Kocher, the current water director. I think he's still the current water director, but one of the things he pointed out was his concerns with contamination, either siltation, chemical and biological runoff into Redwood Creek, which is basically the watershed that's around the Heroin Hill area. Now, this Redwood Creek, it's a tributary to the San Lorenzo River, which is about a half or a quarter mile above the Tate Street water inlet, which is where the city gets about 50% of our water. So think for a moment that, I mean, we really have to solve this issue, because this is truly an environmental concern in which there's an estimate about 20 to 30, according to the Santa Cruz Police Department, of permanent campers up on Heroin Hill area in the Redwood Creek watershed. And, their urination and defecation, drug waste, and bloody rags are getting into that watershed during the seasonal rains. So now that that's getting into the San Lorenzo River, we can look at, and that spills out to our beaches. So we got drug waste, we got and contamination potentially getting into our water supply. So this is like a public health issue.
Okay. So Mark, what's going to be the hardest part of getting this proposed trail actually built? And is this trail going to be accessible for mountain bikers, or is this just going to be a hiking trail in the end? Yeah,
well, we hope that it's well, we're really advocating for a multi-use trail. I don't think it's enough to just put in a hiking exclusive trail only. One of the things that I've noticed about the Pogonip Park is that it's 640 acres, and the northern part of the park, which is far from the Spring Street entrance, is very vacant. Like, there's not a lot of people out there, even though it's open to hikers and dog walkers. Mostly you get a trail runner every now and then. Opening it up to multi-use will allow mountain bikers to park in the downtown area, ride along the levee, and then hit the new multi-use trail to get to the Pogonip, the Yukon Trail, and then up through campus to Wilder. I anticipate that this is going to be a very, very popular trail. It's going to be used quite a lot by cyclists. I think the concern is if cyclists are not at the table, or the equestrian community, then none of the resources that we can bring to the table are going to be part of this. We're not going to volunteer, we're not going to raise money. We have no vested interest in doing this. We have other projects in the county that we can fund.
I thought first we'd start out by setting the scene of what the Pogonip is like in terms of crime and what this trail hopefully might do. We'll start out with you, and just if you could just paint the scene of what kind of crimes go on there. Is it really a dangerous place, or is that just a media creation?
Well, over the last several years, we've seen an increase of narcotic sales and drug activity in the areas of Pogonip. The activity was originally controlled by gang members that now it's kind of funneled down to other gang associates. The crimes is mostly over the heroin drug trade, and what it's brought is you have people selling, but then just a high volume of users. We've had people come from as far out as Modesto to purchase narcotics in that area.
Is there a sign somewhere, this way, Pogonip, you know, get your product? Is there an internet site that's advertising, or does the underground network just word of mouth get people to come there?
I believe it became such a volume that the word of mouth became that was an easy place. It was relatively secluded. It was hard for the police to get a presence in there, so you had people coming from all over to purchase the narcotics. And with that, you get, you know, with the gang members, we've pulled firearms off of people in there. They used to. Even recently, wherever they were doing their narcotic sales, they would stash firearms. We have arrested people that were bringing stolen firearms up into that area for trade. And then, in addition to all the drug use, you have all of the just human refuse that gets left behind. I mean, large volumes of just garbage, anywhere from food items to, I mean, it's really different than, say, like a homeless encampment. You really have, you know, needles, all the stuff to use and cook, and then people will just kind of move into there to use, not to live, but to use, and then whatever debris or refuse they would bring, they would leave into that area.
And what percentage of calls do you think of all of Santa Cruz end up sending you there? I mean, is this a really, here we go again kind of situation for the police department?
It's not really a high percentage of calls that we receive for the area. What makes it difficult for us is the environment itself. It requires a team of officers to actually go in there as a group in order to conduct any enforcement action or respond to calls, period. So it does make it difficult for us to police, simply because of the, you know, the environmental.
And how dangerous is it for people to walk through the park, to be hiking through the park?
Well, for the most part, we haven't seen any, you know, attacks on people just simply walking through the park, but there are several hazards that are posed, whether it's discarded needles, armed conflicts that may occur between drug users and drug sellers. I mean, as you know, Sergeant Filippo mentioned, you know, we are seeing a substantial amount of firearms seizures coming out of the park itself, which gives us great concern. Also, there's a substantial fire danger when you have people processing and cooking heroin in a heavily wooded area, which is, you know, just tons of fuel, you know, within that park. It poses a great danger as well, but no specific attacks on, you know, hikers or people walking through the park.
That's a little bit comforting, but I have to say, you know, Danette, in the history of Santa Cruz, can you back us up a little? What was Pogonip supposed to be, besides a beautiful thing to look at from afar? Is it supposed to be heavily used by the citizens of Santa Cruz as a Parks and Rec opportunity?
Absolutely. Pogonip was purchased through a bond measure, excuse me, specifically to round out our green belt. That's 640 acres, and our vision was that it would be a series of hiking trails and multi-use trails, eventually a community garden, a homeless community garden, hopefully someday a restored Pogonip clubhouse. And I just want to point out that the portion of Pogonip that we're talking about is a little less than 100 acres, so we're not painting a picture of the entire Pogonip. There are still areas of Pogonip on the established trails that are still wonderful for families and individuals to use, and heavily used by legal citizens of our community.
So there's about 100 acres where there's this activity, the drug activity. And tell us about the theory behind this trail. It's a 1.5 mile trail, and the theory is if you put a trail, you'll get more bikers, more hikers, and the folks involved with drugs will move?
Well, initially we tried to close off that 100 acres to help the police department with the enforcement. Once it was posted and closed, trespassing was not allowed. But after a year of that, the activity, the illegal activity, just wasn't reduced as much as we had hoped. So as staff, we started talking about other ideas. And as recreation professionals, we know that bringing people into a distressed area, doing legal activities, often moves that along. And that's what our thought was, that if we could establish this 1.5 mile trail that would connect with the rest of the trail system in Pogonip, it would increase the activity in that portion of Pogonip that's been closed for over a year.
Let me direct my questions to each of you. This theory, I guess they call it the broken window theory. You go into a community, you spruce it up, you paint, you get, you know, a community garden in there, and then you get people, families, you know, to go and just be there. Does that work? And do you have examples of other communities in which this has worked, you know, the kind of clean up the neighborhood plan that you're aware of in other jurisdictions that you've talked to?
I can just speak from my experience. I've been with the city for almost 20 years now, and the neighborhoods, let's not look at a neighborhood that's broken and things, but any neighborhood where the neighbors know each other, support each other, and call out when there's a problem tend to be your safer neighborhoods. You tend to have less crime there. And what we have in this smaller portion of Pogonip is you have an area that even prior to this date, there was no legal trail through a portion of this. And so now there's a spider web of trails that are just being used for this illegal activity. And you have no one that's really going down there that can be our eyes and ears, other than when we get an informant. But usually when a person comes to us, it's after the fact, when we talk again about violence, when they say, hey, these guys are starting to beat people if they don't pay on time and stuff. So those victims don't call us necessarily. We find it out from others. So it's not, as Deputy Chief was saying, there's not a high level of reporting to it. But the neighborhoods where we get the public looking out for each other is usually a safer neighborhood.
But it's not a neighborhood, it's an open space, so what do you think then?
But any area that's a problem for policing, that has that level of participation or an increased level of participation from the residents or the stakeholders is of great value to us. Then we have those eyes and ears out there calling us when they do see those problems on a regular basis, and we can respond to those needs. So that level of participation really ensures our success.
One concern, though, that I had was, why wouldn't the folks just move a little deeper into the woods? If there's a path going through, they go behind the tree. That seems like an obvious, because if I'm a heroin dealer and I have my clientele, they know I'm going to be there, it would be more difficult to move far away and keep my business going. So why don't I just move a little away from the path?
I can actually answer that question. Part of it comes down to some simple premises of commerce. We did, for a while, have so much pressure up there. It did take great man hours and officers to go up there, but we were able to push them out, and the dealers did try to move further out. And what they found is that the customers, so to speak, didn't want to hike that far to go get their product. They wanted to be closer. So it did work out where they hiked significantly farther away, but then pretty soon the dealers came back.
They want the convenience of a fast food stop-off place.
Correct.
Yeah, ease of access.
They also don't want to be observed, and what this trail will provide, it will provide access for Parks and Recreation staff and Police Department staff.
I noticed the levee is a good example, because there didn't used to be a really nice bike path there, and access for the Santa Cruz Police Department to drive along the levee, and that seems to have helped somewhat. Although as a walker, I have to say that I don't feel entirely safe there yet, despite the fact that a bicyclist might whiz by me as a walker. But the slowness of walking makes you, I think, much more vulnerable. And there were people just off the levee in bushes, so I'm not sure it would be significantly more different, but your access point does give me some confidence.
Some of the best information, using the levee as an example, some of the best information that we get, or my team will get, is from a bicyclist that frequents that every day and says, hey, every day at this time I'm observing this. And that allows us then to direct our resources at the appropriate time to where this activity is occurring.
I'm wondering, though, kind of the big picture on dealing with crime and heroin, because maybe if the theory works, you put a path through there and they move somewhere else, but the fact is they're moving somewhere else. So it becomes, okay, now they're there, we have to just, what's the big picture of what really works around drug addiction and sales to decrease it? You wanna?
Obviously, rehabilitation. When it comes to, addressing the addiction within our community, we've definitely could use a lot more, resources for that. We can't do it simply by enforcement alone. We've brought in federal resources to help us address, drugs and gangs within our community, not only in Pogonip, but in our downtown, on our levees, and we've had success. But now we need to, treat the users themselves, and we've always kind of fell short as a community on the rehabilitation side of it. The funding is just not there, and we need to really start focusing our resources toward that, because you're never going to be able to do it just by putting people in jail.
But back to cost, I'm curious how much a bike path might cost, and whether its sole reason for existence is crime prevention, whether it's going to be a positive benefit for bicyclists. How do you weigh these sort of different aspects of a project in order to sell it to those who would spend the money in these hard times? I'm sure these decisions get made with quite a more skeptical eye than they might have 5
Well,
years
the
ago?
initial intent was solely to bring people back into the Pogonip, that area of the Pogonip that was closed. As far as costs go, until we get the go-ahead on it, we will not have a design where we can do cost estimates from. But we do know that there's a great offering from the community, a whole series of volunteers from the equestrians to the bikers to the walkers that have stepped forward and said that they'll offer people power and equipment to help us build that trail. But we have not gone so far as to get a cost estimate until we find out if we can get it approved and get the master plan amended.
And where are we in the political process of moving forward right now?
We've gone through the initial environmental review and taken public comment on the proposed trail for 30 days. And about that same time, the project manager took another job outside the city. So we've kind of slowed it down a little bit. And what that's enabled me to do is continue to take public comment. Because what I want to be able to do is address as many of the concerns that people that don't support the trail as possible, because people are very passionate on both sides, pro and con trail. Mm-hmm. So we've slowed the process down. We'll go back to City Council sometime after the new year, but we don't have that scheduled yet.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting because at the same time the city's considering this, they're embroiled in this really much even longer dialogue about Arana Gulch. And they're both bicycle paths. You would think if you took your bigger view, bird's eye view, that Santa Cruz would be incredibly on board with bicycle travel because it's such a bike-friendly community. And yet you've got the same people who like the idea of bikes, who are considered environmentalists, questioning bike paths. I find it an interesting political conundrum to be in, because I would think places like Boulder and you know, up in Haley, Idaho, around Sun Valley, they have this long bicycle path where you can go from 3 or 4 communities on a bike. And I would love to see Santa Cruz do that, but I am watching the politics, and they're not as you would think they would be.
That's very interesting, and it changes from day to day.
So what are some of the strongest arguments against the trail?
I believe some of the strongest arguments are whether or not the city should undertake a full environmental review rather than a focus just on this trail. And concern about the environment. Concern that, as Rachel said, that this trail may push the problems into other area. And also there's an interest in an alternative trail using the rail line. Mm-hmm. And that's not the city's jurisdiction, and maybe even more complicated than getting a trail through the city process. Mm-hmm. And it would not address our concern of opening up that 100 acres to the community.
And is the big issue really heroin? Is that what the issue is, or is it all kinds of crimes, or is it really focused on heroin?
I'll let Dan address that question, since he's in the field, seeing these problems on a daily basis.
Well, up there it's definitely the heroin trafficking. But in addition to that, you have people going up there to trade in stolen property. You have people there that are going there and getting high, and then coming closely into the Harvey West Business District and into the downtown area. A lot of the people that have police contact in the downtown corridor would go up into there to score their drugs, get their drugs, and then come back into the community on that. So it really is, for a while it was like an out of sight, out of mind type place to deal with it, but the impact really creeped into all these other neighborhoods, because that's where the people were committing other crimes to get their goods to do the trading up there.
And would you recommend to folks to not be walking in that area right now, not be bike riding?
Not at all. I mean, the more people that are in that park, the more uncomfortable it's going to be for those drug sellers and drug users. We're at a point right now where we've had an impact. We've arrested some key players in that drug trade, within the park, and now we need to start backfilling it with some use and some people that are actually utilizing those legal trails currently in order to make it as uncomfortable as possible for those drug users and sellers.
But that area is still closed, so we don't want to encourage people to go in the closed area.
Yeah, legal trails, as I mentioned.
Yes, but the other 500 plus acres, absolutely.
And just a minute left. I wonder if you can paint a picture of your ideal Pogonip, 5 years from now, or whenever we've solved some of the worst of our problems. What would it look like in terms of human use and enjoyment?
a wide variety of use, from hikers and bikers and equestrians, all ages, people gardening, people just enjoying nature.
Going to the clubhouse again.
Oh, wouldn't that be wonderful?
I went to a wedding there years ago. It was a beautiful building.
It
I hope
is.
it lives again.
It's a beautiful space. I used to ride horses up in Pogonip as a park ranger and worked for Danette for many years.
Yeah.
And ultimately, we want to get to have families be able to go anywhere in the park
Yeah.
and not have to hide from this one sliver because of this type of activity.
Well, let's all keep our eyes focused on that time, and thank you for all you're doing to make that come about.